Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you. We're so excited that you took time out of your day to join us. If you're watching live, very excited to have you with us. And if you're watching this later, video on demand style, thank you so much. And we're so excited to be a part of your Wednesday or whatever day you're enjoying this. Today, we have something really, really special for our Better Coffee with Brian stream. Obviously, we really, really, really love coffee. However, one of our favorite things about working in the food and beverage industry is that we get to pair with a lot of amazing other companies and professionals in their fields. And with that thinking, one of the things that we love most is tea. And we're really lucky at Portland Coffee Roasters to work with some fantastic tea vendors. One of them that we're going to be talking with today is Smith Teamaker. And with that, we're going to be actually talking to we've got some good comments going too. Hello, everyone. I see some folks are loving and talking about some of their favorite teas. If you have questions today about tea, please feel free to add those and we'll be passing those through in the interview as well. We will be interviewing today a really, really fantastic and amazing tea professional. His name is Ravi Kroesen. He is the head tea maker at Stephen Smith Tea Makers. And so we're really, really excited to have him join us. And with that, I would like to introduce everyone here to Ravi Kroesen. Hello, Ravi.
Hey Brian, how are you? Hello everyone else.
Doing well, doing well. How are you doing today?
Very good. Yeah. It's just starting to get into spring, so really enjoyed those few moments outside, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, you enjoying the whole Pacific Northwest? It's pretty rainy every day thing.
Well, surprisingly, we're getting some 80-degree weather, which is a little unusual for spring, but yeah, I can't complain.
It is. It's been nice to when I go outside. It's been nice to feel that sunlight for sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ravi, you work with Stephen Smith's Teamaker, and you are a head teamaker. So what does that mean for Stephen Smith?
Yeah, so that is kind of the person that is in charge of the entire tea program, if you will, for Stephen Smith Teamaker, or Smith Teamaker for short. And my job entails ensuring that every time we create new lots of tea, so we actually carry samples of every individual lot of, say, Portland Breakfast, which is a tea we make. We've had, since the inception of making that tea, we have a sample from every lot that we've made to refer to. And the point of that is to actually make the same consistent flavor profile time after time.
Hmm.
So that is a big part. So when you go to the store and you buy one of our teas or you buy Portland Breakfast, you can be ensured that that tea is going to taste the same as it did the last time you tried.
So,
Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say. So with that too, it sounds like something that folks may not know is that tea, it has differences of flavor from year to year, right?
Yes, it's a seasonal product, and there's a lot of factors that go into how that flavor will come about year after year.
Okay.
Exactly. So part of it is that, and that's kind of like the sort of day in, day out sort of function. And the other major element is really creating new teas. So anytime we're in the process of releasing a couple new signature blends, one called Golden Light, which is a turmeric blend, and then a whole range of iced teas for the summer. And so that would be my job, to put those teas together, present it to internally. We go through a process, and then after some approvals and tweaks, we release it. So those two components, and then I guess lastly, I'm kind of the quote unquote face of Smith. So for TV or radio or blogs or anything, I'm the guy who gets wheeled out. So
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun though.
oh, it's great.
Speaking of like finding teas, we were talking on email this week, and you said you were actually in Washington picking some ingredients too.
That's right. Yeah. So we actually have what's called a reserve line, and the reserve line is geared towards highlighting really high-end teas from all around the world. And when most people think of tea, they think of Asia, but there are some people doing some really amazing things here in the U.S. right now. And the goal was to highlight one of these guys, a farmer up in Chehalis by the name of Balazs. He's Hungarian descent, and he's just been this madman on a mission trying to create American tea in a lot of ways. So he has on his estate, or his 29-acre plot, alder trees. And when they're younger, they actually produce a very soft and supple leaf similar to tea. So it's not tea, Camellia sinensis, but it's an herb, if you will. And he produces it like an oolong. So there's some bruising, and which allows oxidation into the leaf and changes the flavor profile. And what you get and the outcome is this really beautiful floral, fragrant experience that actually, when you cup it, it has a bit more longevity than a normal cup of tea. So,
Really?
yeah, so really exciting. We're really excited to release this probably in another month or so, and just kind of one of those things, highlighting something totally unique. Herbal teas very rarely reach past the threshold of becoming like high end or expensive. They tend to be a little bit more commodity in the general scheme of things when you compare them to most tea prices. But this one's worth every penny, and it's going to be amazing. So yeah,
Well,
that's what we were doing.
with that too, I'm kind of curious for our audience. Could you also, you were talking about Camellia sinensis and the difference between that and herbal teas. Just as a brief sort of recap, how would you define tea versus an herbal tea, and what are some of the differences there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. So all tea comes from the same plant called Camellia sinensis. And now Camellia sinensis can get broken down into two major sub-varieties, and that's Camellia sinensis and Camellia sinensis assamica. Sinensis is what's often used in a lot of China, and assamica is used in Southwest China, and then a large part of what the British took and transplanted throughout the rest of the world. So, in Africa, in parts in Assam, in India, you'll see this tea varietal being used. So think of them in this way: like your sinensis is kind of like the race car, and the assamica is like a bus. So the sinensis is much more agile, fast, nimble. It really has a lot of nuance, whereas the bus is a little bit more, it's bulky, it gets the job done, and it kind of, it's not going to be that amazing in terms of flavor, but it's really powerful. So yeah, it's really, that's kind of like the DNA of those two sub-varieties. And from there, you get thousands and thousands of different sub varieties or cultivars, cultivated varieties that people have made specifically to be utilized to make one specific type of tea. So white teas, for instance, in northern Fujian province in China, they have cultivars that have been made just for making that type of tea, like dabai is what is called big white. So yeah, that's kind of a nutshell, not to go too into the weeds with it, but yeah, that's kind of how it breaks all down. So that compared to herbals. Herbals are what are called tisanes. Because they're brewed in the exact same way that you brew tea, they've kind of gotten lumped in with tea as just the genre or the type of beverage that it is. So, you can have people, if you want to be really snooty, you could say like, tut, that isn't tea, that herbal tea, that peppermint you're drinking. It's really not tea. But, we're not purists here. We like to play around with a lot of things, and, we're happy to have herbals as part of our quote unquote tea offering.
Well, and if I understand correctly too, some of the tea offerings that you have, you're actually blending teas and herbals too, right? You're combining these blends together. How does that blending process work for you as a tea maker?
Yeah, so tea blends have been around forever. Think of Earl Grey. Earl Grey was one of the first. The Chinese were actually blending teas back in the 14th century. So they were doing jasmine scented teas and rose scented teas way, way back. So hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so if you think tea blends have been around for quite some time, but in modern times, our founder, Stephen Smith, actually, he started Stash and Tazo as well before he sold both of those and then started on to Stephen Smith Teamaker. He basically was responsible in a lot of people's eyes for creating the first kind of like tea blends into the grocery world, into the specialty tea market in the U.S. So, at that time you had Celestial Seasonings and Lipton. That's what you could buy really at the grocery store. And by bringing Stash, it kind of changed the game. So, he's often called the father of the modern tea blend. And really, when you think of a tea blend in today's age, it's really the sky's the limit. Whatever you so choose to want to add to the tea, as long as the flavors go together, you're good. So, herbs. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, how does that process, do you have a team internally that's, I know you said you're bringing new teas in front of your team. How are you guys evaluating tea blends and kind of talking about how they work together and maybe they don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is trial and error. So you kind of have a concept that you're working with, whether it's, a customer that has wants a certain type of tea. or you're trying to think of a new tea blend for our line itself, it's really, you think of it, the base of the product is really about 75, 3/4 of the total makeup of the blend. And then everything else is just kind of added on to add nuance and character and draw out the flavor. So you really want to be concerned about having a base of some sort. And when you're doing a complete herbal blend, say, if you're doing a chamomile forward blend, your chamomile might be the most of the quantity in it. If you're doing something like rooibos from South Africa, which is a really great substitute for tea, because it takes milk very well, but it's caffeine free, that would be your base. And then you would add a bunch of other layers on top of it. So it's kind of like, you kind of get to the point where you get close, what we call in the ballpark. And then from there, we fine tune and just tweak it and tweak it. And so it's funny because you can get into like 0.5%, or 1% can change so much of the flavor profile of the tea. And so that's kind of what the essence of it. And then once we get to a place where we're in the ballpark, then we kind of share it with the other people and kind of get a sense, some feedback internally as to what works, what doesn't, and make tweaks from there.
Pat, it sounds so much just like cooking and like coffee blending too. I mean, I think my experience is that a lot of these things can seem kind of almost mystical or magical, right? To me, tea blending genuinely seems like magic because the degree of nuance and understanding and delicacy that has to be taken into account. But it seems also a lot like just cooking generally, right? Like a little bit of spice can really throw a dish, or a little bit too much salt can really kind of have it really, really taste not the way you want it to. But by having these kind of careful balances and through trial and error, you can really hone something kind of exceptional.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so much so.
Oh, that's so cool. So I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn because I want to talk a little bit about you and talk about how you got into tea. So I know you have a little bit of an interesting backstory with tea. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Oh, sure. So I got into tea kind of by mistake, I would say. It was my brother actually I was looking for work in 2000, and my brother was working for the Tao of Tea, which is a Portland-based tea company. And I actually started in the warehouse, and the warehouse was I think about a 20,000 square foot space, one working light, no shelving, and a bunch of boxes. And it's like, okay, organize this. So I organized it, and that was kind of like, okay, maybe this is just like I'm getting paid to do this one job and that's it. But then once we organized it, there was a stack of invoices that needed to be filled, all for teaware. And so they handed us the stack of invoices, and we filled those orders. And from that point, it was like, well, we need a manager to manage the warehouse. And I'm like, okay, I'm available. So around like 2 or 3 months into that process, the owner decided to bring all the tea down. And there's about 200 teas that he had in his total offering. And so every morning I'm like, well, I have 200 teas to try. I'm just going to try one tea after the next every day. And so somewhere around like a quarter of the way to like 25, maybe 50 teas in, I came across this tea from China. It was called a Phoenix Oolong, and it's Milanxiang, which means honey orchid fragrance. And it stopped me dead in my tracks. It tasted like stone fruit. It had this orchid flavor, true to its name, and this honey note. And it was just like, how can a tea taste this good without anything added to it? And it was just so phenomenal. I was just blown away by the fact that this tea could taste that good. And it was really, that was when the light bulb went on, if you will, excuse the term. But it was really just after that I was sold. And, over the years, those last 20 years, I've had probably about 4 or 5 other of those really key moments where there was life before that, trying that tea, and then life after. And it really was a very different experience between that, the before that tea and then after.
Oh, that sounds so amazing. And it sounds like from that too, it seems like you've really kind of positioned yourself professionally to try to offer those moments to other people too. We were talking before this got started about how you've done tea pairings with tea and cheese and other pieces, and getting different people together to try teas and all different kinds of perspectives. Is there anything of those experiences that have really stuck out to you?
Oh gosh, yeah. Tea and cheese is a really interesting and fun experience. Almost anyone can do that. And if you have a couple cheeses at home, if you're a cheese connoisseur, I would suggest taking several of them out and trying one tea and then trying each one. And you would basically take a little slice, put it in your mouth, and then drink a little bit of tea and kind of let them mingle in the mouth before swallowing. and you really get some really interesting qualities to it. Over the years, it's gone from like the most wonderful experiences where everyone feels elevated to like they're like, wow, I had no idea tea and X cheese or chocolate could taste like this when so amazing. To other ones which just were like utter disasters where you're trying to get everything just in place and nothing's quite landing just right. Tea's getting spilt everywhere, and so over the years I've been fortunate enough to learn from the mistakes and refine it and get to a point where it's really just the intention and about like sharing a really wonderful experience with people, and it seems to do the job.
I would know nothing at all about the idea of having some field tastings at all. I've definitely not led many in my career where everyone kind of gets to the table and they start tasting it and they're like, yeah, that all just tastes like coffee. All right, well, anyway, see you later. Have a nice day. If my father-in-law, or not my father-in-law, if my stepdad is watching, I remember I brought home an AeroPress, which is one of my favorite brewing methods, and this really nice coffee that I loved, and brewed it up for him, and I had him taste it, and he went, "Yep, that tastes like coffee." It's like, that's an expensive geisha. It's so nice.
That's what I do with my mom too. Like because I know she only drinks coffee. Tea is just like, yeah, it tastes like tea. But with coffee too, I'm like, oh, this is a really good. And I know she likes dark roast, so I'm like, always if it's like quote unquote a dark roast for like third wave, which isn't dark roast and like French roast or Italian roast. It's not like roasted with an inch of its life, so to speak. It's more of a kind of a so I keep trying to bring her these ones, and she's just like, yeah, it's not like my roast. So I try, but I totally get that experience where you want to share, and one day.
One day. Well, and I think the nice thing though is that with both tea and coffee, right, we have such a really big array of flavors and experiences that are available to that really you can find something you love in tea or coffee, and you can also find things that are really going to challenge your understanding of what those things can be. And for me, that's what I love, right? I love having the opportunity to even expand my own idea of what tea or coffee can be, right? Like I've had a moment like what you talked about where I tasted a coffee and there was the moment before tasting that coffee and there was a moment everything after was different. I think the first time I tasted a natural processed coffee was a great example of this because it was like, oh my goodness, this just tastes like blueberries, and I ran around the house. And I was like running to my roommates and going like, taste this coffee, doesn't this taste like blueberries? And they're like, yeah, I guess. And then I just kept like circling around. But it's just it's I take for granted often that with either of our industries there's so much opportunity to have really different experiences, and by willing to go a little bit outside of my comfort zone, I found really incredible rewards back. So
totally, and it informs everything else after that too, right? Because like so you find that when you're pushing your palate like that, it gives you new appreciation for the things that you've always been drinking. You're like, oh, all of a sudden you taste that new wrinkle in that. You kind of helps to separate out some of the flavor profiles of that, your favorite go-to or something like that. And it's just, that's what I find too, is it just, the more you experience, the better your palate is. And then you're just like, just at a point where anywhere you go, whatever the experience is, you're just that much more appreciative in a sense, I think, whether it's eating food or, or drinking an assortment of beverages.
Yeah. I have a couple good questions that have come through the chat.
Okay.
I want to take a second to bring one of them up. Mary Clayson, my mother-in-law actually, was asking, Ravi, what is your favorite tea and cheese combo?
Wow. Oh God. Okay. So there are quite a few. I would say, like we were talking a little bit about this before, a good Chinese green tea. So something like say our Mao Feng Shui, mixed with like a camembert. So, that is a really nice pairing. It just, the rich creaminess of the camembert pulls out some of the buttery and sort of cooked green vegetable notes in the tea itself. And it's almost, it just adds on to it. It's almost like the most rich saute of like seasonal greens that you've ever experienced and stuff. So, yeah. On the harder side, if you think of like harder, sharper cheeses, those work really well with like pu'ers. So specifically like what's called choux pu'er, so like cooked or pu'er, which is what most people in the U.S. know pu'er to be. So it's kind of already it's fermented, it's post-fermented tea, and it has this dark, rich, earthy quality, and it kind of bounces really well with the sharp nuttiness of some of those cheeses. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, if folks aren't familiar with, I'm going to pronounce it poorly because I will say that my pronunciation of most tea names is not super solid, but pu'er.
Yeah. Oh, so pu'er works great, but in China, it's a little bit more of a rolly R. So pu'er, it's
Pu'er.
kind of pu'er is great. That's most people will understand that. Just traveling to China a lot, you kind of, yeah.
I
It's
do.
funny. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I absolutely do the same thing with some names of coffee, where I'm like, oh yeah, it's this type of coffee, and then I'll say it as if I'm like talking to a coffee buyer or someone. Then I'm like,
Right.
oh wait, like I can back that down a little bit and just be like, you're good chef instead of like
Right.
you're good
Right.
chef,
Yeah.
like things like that. Um,
Totally.
but for our folks who are maybe new to some different types of tea, pu'er is a fermented tea, correct? Where the tea leaves are bruised, they're oxidized, and then they're fermented in cakes, and it creates this really potent, earthy, kind of funky flavors that are really intense and complex. Would you say that's about right?
Actually, yeah. So just with the shoe pour, or the pour that we know, so it's fermented actually loose initially, and then it's dried down. And it's actually a fairly large process. You need tons of this tea at one time to make it. So, and it's one of the few examples where you want the larger the factory that makes this tea, the better, because they have to have safety protocols in place because they're using, bacteria to create the fermentation process. So you have potential for molds and stuff like that, unwanted and perhaps dangerous. So, the better quality ones have really good stringent systems in place. And then so when they'll ferment it and then they dry it down and then press it into it. So,
And then, if please correct me if I'm wrong on this too, but the way it was described to me initially is that part of the reason why that methodology came into being was because it was a way to help extend the potency of like tea. It was originally sort of a way for people to take tea leaves, which were expensive, and say, I want to sort of siphon these out for longer, so I'm going to process them in a little bit of a different way. Would you say that's sort of more folklore, or do you think there's sort of accuracy to that?
oh, it's a little bit of a folklore. So pu'er comes from southwest China. So Yunnan is landlocked. Most of the other tea making provinces are all in the east, and they all have access to rivers. So creating a loose leaf tea product is very easy to put on a barge and have it shipped down to the local port for trading, and to sell it. In Yunnan, everything needs to be put on pack animals to be shipped out. So often this tea, when it first was being made, was being traded with Tibet for horses, and so the horses it was called the tea horse road, and so this road, basically, in order to get them on the pack animals, they would need to compress them. So having compressed tea fits on the back of these animals, and they're going through sort of tropical rainforest into high elevation, very dry, arid climates. In that tropical rainforest part, where it would take months, these things get rained on and then dried out. So they were experiencing this enormous amount of humidity throughout the entire period because of all the rain and stuff. And so they were fermenting on the backs of these animals. And by the time they got to Tibet, there was a different flavor profile that the people there got very used to. And so there's a point where they figured out that, oh, we can do this, regionally and create this sort of process to give this flavor profile.
Hmm.
So Tibet originally as one of the major drivers for that, and then Hong Kong and southern China in Guangdong province that consumed pu'er. Pu'er was often used, fermented pu'er is good for traditional Chinese medicine for reducing cholesterol and helping to prevent strokes. So it would be served after meals to help soak up some of the fat and dim sum.
Oh
And
wow.
so that was kind of the origin of it. And then in the 70s, because the demand was so great and you had to actually wait years for these things to ferment to the point where they were what they would consider drinkable, they came up with this process called the wodui, which is wet piling. And then they tweaked it, and so they could actually create this, what is now shu pu'er. And that was created in the 70s as a fermentation process accelerated to match what would normally take 10 or 15 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it's so two things that I think that makes me think of. One, it's kind of incredible to think that these processes that are very very sort of old and historical and based in a context, we're still finding interesting ways to innovate them within the last like 50, 60, 70 years. There's still amazing innovations, even though people have been drinking and consuming tea for thousands of years.
Absolutely. Brian, it's funny because like people think of tea as having that history, but it is we are in the golden age of tea right now. You can actually get some of the best teas that were reserved for royalty or for the wealthy elite in China. You can get these teas shipped to your door in less than a week. You can have tea from all over the world, shipped to the middle of the United States in such a short period of time. And the price that you would pay if you look at it per cup is almost, is fairly reasonable, even for something that's considered, has a high price value per ounce. And so not only do you have this accessibility, but you also have in China, after the opening of the economy, you went from these sort of moribund state-run tea factories to all these entrepreneurial people creating tea on their own, and each one competing against each other and create the best tea possible. And so every year in China, people want to know what the new style of tea is. So there's this constant race to create new experiences and new processing styles. So very much we're at this cutting edge where we're experiencing new teas that have never been experienced before, and these processing styles built on some really the foundations that have been going back thousands of years.
Well, and to build on that a little bit too, we actually had someone in the chat mention that with not only with tea processing, but just with these differences of ingredients in this trial and error process that we were talking about earlier, and how things kind of start to evolve. Anna had mentioned that she recently had a tea with watermelon seeds and didn't realize that it was seeds could add flavor to a tea in that sense. And it sounds like we're still in this phase of experimentation with tea blends. I know that you all are doing a lot of really interesting experiments with tea blending, in addition to sourcing some of the most excellent teas on their own and finding ways to combine them, which I also find pretty compelling. I think the coffee industry could actually stand to learn a little bit about, I think sometimes in the coffee industry, I know it's been my case where I've looked at a coffee and been like, no, it has to be just this ingredient. We just have to focus on coffee alone. We can't even, it's unconscionable to add milk or sugar to it, right? But that's not really fair. And I think it's more interesting when we bring more things in and say, what kind of other flavors are interesting with this? What other things can we do? How can we be creative with these things to provide more wonderful and complex and engaging experiences?
Totally. Yeah. That's exactly it. And, you can still have that great coffee that you only drink on its own, but that doesn't mean that you can't try to find new ways to also express that flavor profile with other ingredients.
Yeah. So actually we're running a little low on time, and I want to at least ask two more questions, because with Pu'er, I think one of the things that we see that sells really well with our customers and people really engage with, especially my experience as a barista, is an excellent breakfast tea. And I know the Portland breakfast tea is a little unusual because unlike other teas, it has some Pu'er in there. Would you mind talking a little bit about how the Smith Teamaker Portland breakfast tea is similar and different to other breakfast teas on the market?
Sure. Just as an overall view of breakfast teas, so people really think that breakfast tea should have, like English breakfast should have this defined sort of a sort of recipe, and really any black tea, even a single origin black tea, could be considered a breakfast tea. So it's really, once you understand that, all bets are off, and it's really kind of like, well, what can we do? And at Smith, we really like to break rules. And so if breakfast tea should be only black tea and various different blends of black tea, perhaps anything from single origin to blends, what if we added something that was very similar in flavor profile, like a pu'er, which technically is its own tea category, add that into a black tea blend, and then create Portland breakfast. And so it's kind of like, if you just drink it, you wouldn't know that there's pu'er in there really, unless you're really paying attention. And then once you pay attention, you're like, oh, you can't stop identifying it in the taste profile. So yeah, it's just one of those opportunities to really highlight, what we do so well at Smith, and also create something that's really nice, dark, rich. It speaks to the Portland sort of ethos of, kind of a lot of rain, but also something dark, heavy, and takes milk really easily, but could be enjoyed on its own.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then if you were to have any tips for our tea brewers at home, what are some of, like, if you had to say the top 3 things that someone could do to improve their tea game, get more out of their tea at home, what would your top 3 tips be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really important. Your top three things you want to think of is water quality, water temperature, and then steep time. So those three things are the most important. Your vessel can be really a lot of different things. As long as, I guess, if you want to get your ratio from tea to vessel, water volume of the vessel, that's important too. So water quality, if you don't have access to spring water or something like that, you don't want to use distilled. But if you, at very least, we have good water in the Northwest. Bare minimum of filter, so a Brita filter, even or a filter attached to the sink. Now, with your water temperature, it's important to, as the temperature goes up, the steep time decreases. So your window becomes smaller. So we recommend lower steep times for green teas because they can become bitter very quickly with a higher water temperature. So paying attention to your water temperature when you're with the tea you're steeping, and then the time. So making sure that you're within a window. We actually give one specific minute. Other companies sometimes give windows. So usually you don't want to be more than a minute over what we recommend. But yeah, paying attention to those variables, and if you can keep those in mind, you'll tend to get a pretty good cup of tea.
Oh, that's so fantastic. And then something that we've often had asked too is with Stephen Smith, your teas come in sachets. They're really excellent teas in sachets. Is it okay to, through the course of drinking your tea, re-steep a sachet of that tea? Is it a one and done thing, or what kind of process can people have with their tea bags?
Oh, you can totally steep it a second time and even a third. I mean, it just really depends on your preference. With the tea sachet, that first steep is going to be the strongest. But there are some teas that really work well with a second steep. Perhaps try to extend the steep time for a couple more minutes before removing the sachet, and you'll probably get a good second cup. You can even try a third cup and push it even further in terms of the steep time. It's also raising the temperature on the second and third can also possibly help. So those are the things I would recommend. Yeah, it's really up to the customer in terms of how their preferences.
That's fantastic. And then before we go, where can folks find your products? How can folks continue to support Stephen Smith Teamaker during everything that's happening?
Thank you. Yeah, you can either go on our website at www.smithtea.com, and all of our products are available there, or in most grocery stores in the Northwest, we are available, and with some smattering of grocery stores throughout the U.S. currently. So those are the places that we're currently available.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, I know Portland Coffee Roasters, if you're in the Portland area, sort of close to the close and east side, we're now offering delivery through our cafe at Oak Street. And I think we're selling not only the Smith tea as a drinkable product, but also some boxes of Smith tea too. So if folks want to go there, you can go to our website, portlandcoffeeroasters.com, and there's actually a big red button that says deliver. So if you're in the area, you can use that too. But
yes, please.
Yeah,
that would be great. Thank you, Brian.
Absolutely.
Apologies for not mentioning that.
It is so fantastic to have you on. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you come back at some point too and share some more interesting information about tea. Before we go, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know? Is there anything else you'd like to say before we part ways for the day?
Well, just hope everyone is staying healthy and safe, and really appreciate. I know that a lot of people are drinking a lot of tea now since they've been at home. Nice sort of counterbalance to the coffee in the morning. So, yeah, just enjoy that tea, and it's really meant to take a moment just to reflect and be grateful for what we all have. So, thank you for the time, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us as well. And next week, we'll be back with some more interesting streams about coffee too. So keep your coffee curiosity and your tea curiosity brewing. Feel free to send any questions you have to us at training@portlandroastingcoffee.com. And then I just want to encourage everyone to stay curious, stay caffeinated, and stay safe. Thanks so much, y'all, and have a great day.
Thank you.